It begins with a whisper, not in the crowded halls of history, but in the forgotten corners of dusty archives, among yellowed parchment and faded. A tale so delicate, so carefully concealed, that for centuries it has survived in fragments of rumor and shards of memory. The story of a map. Not just any map, but one said to contain the final resting place of the Knights Templar's most coveted treasure. Some call it the greatest hoard of medieval wealth ever assembled. Others believe it was something far more dangerous: knowledge, relics, or even sacred objects that could shift the balance of power in Christendom itself. Whatever the truth, the map remains one of history's most enduring enigmas. And tonight, we step into the labyrinth it has drawn across time. Imagine Europe in the aftermath of the Templars' fall. Their great castles seized, their leaders imprisoned, their very name dragged into the mud by accusations of heresy and dark rituals. And yet, through it all, their treasure, both physical and spiritual, was never found. Chroniclers speak of wagons slipping out of Paris in the dead of night, of ships vanishing from La Rochelle's harbor, of coded instructions entrusted only to a handful of men who disappeared into the shadows. But the greatest whisper of all is that a single chart, disguised and reworked, survived the centuries. A parchment whose markings meant nothing to the uninitiated, yet to those who knew the secret language of the Templars, it was a beacon pointing to where the last and greatest secret of the Order had been hidden away. At first glance, such stories sound like the stuff of legend, no different from the myths of Atlantis or El Dorado. Yet, as with all legends, there is a stubborn thread of consistency. Certain manuscripts speak of sacred geometry woven into the designs of cathedrals, as though every arch and column were part of a larger code. Some explorers claim that the map's symbols mirror those very patterns, linking holy sites across Europe in a network of knowledge invisible to the untrained eye. Was it coincidence or a deliberate breadcrumb trail laid down by men who knew their time was running out? The fascination with this map endures not only because of what it promises, but because of how effectively it has eluded discovery. There are stories of priests in southern France who swore their parish held fragments of an old chart, only to find their documents seized and locked away by higher authorities. There are whispered accounts of Freemason lodges in Scotland displaying strange star charts said to align with hidden vaults. Even in Portugal, where the Templars reformed under a new banner after their suppression, rumors tell of codices passed from master to master, each page containing veiled hints of a larger, unified map. In each case, we encounter the same puzzle, a tantalizing glimpse, never the full picture. To understand why this map holds such allure, we must place ourselves in the mindset of the Templars themselves. These were not mere soldiers or bankers, though history often reduces them to that. They were initiates into a worldview where symbols mattered more than words, where secrecy was not simply about survival, but about protecting truths deemed too potent for the unready. If they possessed sacred relics, the Grail, fragments of the true cross, or even arcane manuscripts from Jerusalem, then a simple hiding place would not suffice. They would have needed to ensure that only the worthy, those trained in their mysteries, could ever hope to retrieve it. A map written in plain lines and letters would never do. There's had to be a map of riddles. And so, the whispers persist of a parchment where lines double as constellations, where mountain ranges align with the Star of Bethlehem, where rivers curve in the shape of alchemical symbols. To the eyes of a traveler, it was nonsense. To the initiated, it was instruction. That is why, even centuries later, when scattered mentions of such a chart arise, they continue to capture the imagination of seekers and skeptics alike. Because if the map is real, then it means the Templars did not merely scatter and vanish. It means they planned their disappearance down to the last detail. Mainstream historians are, of course, skeptical. Many dismiss the idea of a hidden map as the product of later Romanticism, a story invented by treasure hunters or Freemason writers in the 18th century who sought to clothe their rituals in the glamour of medieval mystery. They argue that if the Templars had hidden anything, it would long since have been uncovered by monarchs, churchmen, or modern archaeologists. And yet, the question remains unanswered. Why, in all the extensive confiscations of Templar property, was nothing resembling the legendary treasure ever cataloged? Why do we find tantalizing gaps in the records at the exact moments when convoys of goods disappeared? Silence, after all, can be as telling as speech. The legend of the map forces us to consider another possibility, that knowledge was not lost, merely concealed. That over centuries it passed like contraband, from hand to hand, always in danger of exposure, but never fully extinguished. Some versions say the map was preserved in monasteries, carefully hidden in psalters or hymnals. Others suggest it traveled with Templar descendants to distant lands, where it was redrawn and reinterpreted. There are even claims that fragments of it were incorporated into Renaissance paintings, coded into brushstrokes and geometric proportions that only initiates would recognize. Each of these theories is speculative, but together they weave a pattern. The map is less a single sheet of parchment and more a tradition of encoded knowledge. And so we return to the haunting image, a hidden chart, resting in silence, its lines waiting to be traced, its symbols waiting to be unlocked. A map that does not merely guide us through geography, but through layers of history, faith, and power. A map that, if real, could rewrite what we think we know about the fate of the Templars and the secrets they carried into exile. In this story, we are invited to play the role of seekers ourselves, to step into the shoes of the treasure hunter poring over faded manuscripts by candlelight, of the archivist stumbling on a forgotten folder in a library basement, of the archaeologist brushing dirt from a symbol carved into stone and realizing it mirrors the shape on an ancient chart. Each discovery, however small, brings us closer to the possibility that the map was not simply a myth but a key, one that still awaits a lock to open. But as we set out on this journey, a warning must be heeded. For those who sought this map before us often found themselves tangled in webs of obsession, secrecy, and peril. Kings and popes once feared what the Templars concealed. Modern institutions, too, have reasons to bury truths that might upend comfortable narratives. To chase the forbidden map is not only to chase gold, but to challenge the guardians of history itself. And in that sense, perhaps, the map is doing precisely what it was meant to, separating the curious from the committed, filtering out those unwilling to risk everything for revelation. This is where our story begins. A single forbidden map, half fact, half legend, hovering between worlds, the material and the mystical, the historical and the conspiratorial. In its lines, we may yet find a path that leads us across centuries, from the fall of a knightly order to the hidden vaults that may still rest untouched. Whether we find treasure, relic, or something more intangible, the map continues to beckon. And the deeper we follow, the more the line between myth and history begins to blur. The story of a map cannot be told without first understanding the men who may have drawn it. To truly appreciate why such a chart might exist, we must step back to the dawn of the 12th century, into a world torn between faith and fear, where knights swore oaths not merely to kings, but to God himself. It was in this crucible that the Knights Templar were born, an order, destined to wield power far beyond the battlefield, to amass wealth and knowledge so profound that their very name would echo through the ages. The First Crusade had unleashed chaos across the Holy Land. Pilgrims, filled with devotion and desperation, poured into Jerusalem, yet the roads that carried them were plagued by bandits and hostile forces. The Holy City was a place of sanctity, but also of danger. Out of this climate arose a small brotherhood of knights, led by Hugues de Payens, who pledged themselves to a radical idea. Not only would they defend pilgrims with the sword, but they would dedicate their entire lives, their property, and their souls to God. They were not mercenaries, nor mere soldiers of fortune. They were warrior monks, men who fused the cloister with the battlefield, who prayed at dawn and drew blades at noon. At first, their numbers were meager, just 9 knights, 9 men, with little more than their armor, their vows, and their unshakable faith. They lived humbly, quartered in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, from which they took their name. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon soon shortened to the Knights Templar. Their seal, depicting two knights riding a single horse, reflected their poverty, or at least their supposed poverty. For though they began in humility, their destiny was anything but poor. With the backing of the Church, their mission spread. Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential religious figures of the age, praised them as the new model of Christian knighthood, fierce against the infidel, humble before God. His words ignited admiration across Europe, and soon nobles and commoners alike poured donations into the order. Lands, castles, and wealth began to accumulate, transforming 9 poor knights into the custodians of a growing empire. The Templars were unlike any other order. They answered not to kings, but directly to the Pope, a freedom that made them untouchable by secular powers. They became protectors of the pilgrim routes, guardians of sacred relics, and formidable warriors whose white mantles, marked with the Red Cross, struck terror into their enemies. Chroniclers described their charges on the battlefield as unstoppable, fueled by a faith so intense that death seemed not a risk but a victory. Yet it was not only their military might that set them apart. The Templars developed a system of organization and finance that foreshadowed modern banking. A pilgrim in France could deposit money with the Templars, travel across dangerous lands, and withdraw the same funds in Jerusalem with a coded note of exchange. In doing so, the Templars built a network of trust, influence, and financial power that spanned continents. Kings borrowed money from them. Merchants relied on them. They became not only monks and warriors, but bankers, administrators, and architects of an invisible empire. It was in this vast accumulation of wealth, land, and knowledge that the seeds of their legend were sown. For as their coffers swelled, so too did rumors. Whispers spread that the Templars unearthed treasures beneath the Temple Mount, relics from Solomon's time, perhaps even secrets from the ancient world. Some said they found the Ark of the Covenant, hidden in the depths below Jerusalem. Others claimed they carried away fragments of the true cross or manuscripts lost since the dawn of Christianity. These stories, though impossible to prove, reflect the growing sense that the Templars were more than soldiers, that they were custodians of hidden truths. Their power grew so immense that they became a state within a state. Across Europe, Templar preceptories dotted the landscape. Fortresses, farms, and commanderies, each connected by invisible threads to the central order. They developed their own code of law, their own rituals of initiation, their own inner circle bound by secrecy. The map, if it ever existed, would have been a natural extension of this world, coded, hidden, and reserved for those who understood the language of secrecy. But with power came envy, and with wealth came danger. Kings who once borrowed from the Templars began to resent their independence. The order's refusal to bend to secular authority painted them as arrogant, untouchable, and their secrecy, which once inspired awe, began to arouse suspicion. What went on behind the closed doors of their chapter meetings? What oaths were whispered in the candlelight of their rituals? To the common mind, such mysteries bred fear, and fear would one day be weaponized against them. Still, before their fall, the Templars stood at the height of their glory. Their banners flew in the Crusader states. Their coffers overflowed with silver. Their vaults, it was said, held treasures no monarch could rival. But it was not only material wealth that mattered. It was the intangible, the knowledge they carried, the secrets they protected, whether hidden beneath Jerusalem, encoded in symbols, or preserved in manuscripts. These are the very things that made the idea of a secret map plausible. For if any order had reason to conceal its treasures and riddles, it was the Templars. They were men who thought in terms of eternity, not decades. They built structures aligned with stars, carved symbols that echoed sacred geometry, and encoded spiritual truths into stone. Why should we doubt that they would also encode directions to their greatest legacy into a map no enemy could decipher? The rise of the Templars is thus not just a tale of knights and battles, but a vision that fused devotion with power, secrecy with survival. And though they began as 9 poor knights sharing a single horse, they ended as an order whose shadow would loom over Europe for centuries. Their ascent was meteoric, their influence unmatched, and their mysteries, as we shall see, too dangerous to be allowed to survive unchallenged. When we hear the phrase, the Templar treasure, the mind instinctively conjures images of overflowing chests filled with glittering coins, heaps of jewels, and golden chalices stacked high in dark vaults. And indeed, the Knights Templar did accumulate extraordinary material wealth. They received tithes, land, donations, and spoils of war. They lent to kings and financed crusades. Yet, the legend of their treasure does not rest on mere gold or silver. To the seeker, to the believer in hidden histories, the true nature of their hoard was something far more enigmatic. For if gold alone were at stake, surely it would have been catalogued, seized, and melted down by the monarchs who brought the Templars to ruin. And yet, the records remain curiously empty. What was taken into custody in 1307 does not match the wealth they are known to have possessed. So where did it go? And what was so precious that it needed to be hidden behind symbols, encoded in riddles, and perhaps preserved on a forbidden map? The answer lies in the notion that the Templar treasure was never just material. Many chroniclers of the time hint at relics and artifacts carried back from the East. In Jerusalem, the Templars lodged upon the very site of Solomon's Temple, a place steeped in biblical history and whispered to conceal ancient vaults. Legends tell of excavations conducted under the Temple Mount, of strange objects brought forth under cover of secrecy. Was it here, some wonder, that they uncovered remnants of the Ark of the Covenant? Or perhaps scrolls filled with knowledge older than Christianity itself? If such discoveries were made, they would have been considered too dangerous, too destabilizing, to ever be revealed openly. Gold could buy power, but knowledge, forbidden, ancient knowledge, could overturn kingdoms. The theories grow even more dramatic. Some suggest the Templars unearthed the Holy Grail itself. Not a jeweled cup as later romances imagined, but a vessel, an object, or perhaps even a body of secret teachings connected to Christ and his disciples. Others claim they discovered relics of Christ's passion, the spear that pierced his side, fragments of the cross, or sacred shrouds imbued with mystery. To those who see the Templars as custodians of esoteric truths, these relics would not merely be religious curiosities. They would be sources of legitimacy, proof of hidden lineages, and symbols that could shake the very foundations of the medieval church. There is also the tantalizing possibility that the treasure was intellectual rather than physical. Some traditions insist that scrolls hidden beneath Jerusalem contain knowledge inherited from the Jews of antiquity, perhaps even from Egypt itself. Arcane writings on astronomy, sacred geometry, alchemy, or the lost sciences of the ancients may have come into Templar possession. To medieval Europe, such manuscripts would have seemed heretical, threatening. But to the Templars, initiates of ritual and symbol, this knowledge may have been a key to understanding the cosmos itself. How fitting, then, that such a treasure would require preservation on a map designed not only as a chart of places, but as a mirror of hidden wisdom. Even their contemporaries seemed to sense the Templars were guarding something more than worldly riches. The ferocity of the charges brought against them, heresy, blasphemy, secret rites, speaks of paranoia born of ignorance. If the Templars practiced rituals unknown to the common world, what were they based on? Did they inherit ancient mysteries through what they discovered in Jerusalem? Could the whispered accusations of idol worship or strange symbols actually reflect misunderstood practices linked to the relics they had uncovered? If so, then the treasure was not only physical objects, but entire systems of belief, teachings designed to be preserved against the coming storm. For treasure hunters of later centuries, the Templar hoard became an obsession precisely because of its elusive nature. Unlike pirate gold or kingly ransoms, it was never itemized, never described, never discovered. Instead, it lived in the margins, in rumors of hidden vaults beneath French cathedrals, in whispers of chests spirited away on carts, in suggestions that ships from La Rochelle sailed west carrying something that could never be allowed to fall into royal hands. Every fragment of the story adds weight to the idea that this was not ordinary wealth, but something priceless. And if priceless, then surely mapped, hidden, and protected with a devotion equal to the cause that birthed it. It is here that the legend of the map gains its greatest strength. For a hoard of coin needs only secrecy, but a sacred treasure, one tied to relics, knowledge, or relic knowledge, requires guardianship. It requires a cipher, a system only initiates could read. The map, then, becomes more than a set of directions. It becomes an extension of the treasure itself, an artifact layered in symbols that reflect the very mysteries it protects. To read, it would not simply mean finding a hidden chest. It would mean entering into the mindset of the Templars, decoding the signs of a world where the material and the spiritual were inseparable. To say the Templar treasure was beyond gold is not to deny that riches were involved. Surely, they carried coin and plate, jewels and reliquaries, as any wealthy order would. But the aura that has clung to their legacy across 7 centuries cannot be explained by coinage alone. A vanished fortune of silver might have filled the coffers of a king, but it would not have inspired endless speculation, novels, expeditions, and secret societies. The persistence of the legend points to something deeper, something that resonates across time because it was never meant to be destroyed. The map, if real, is the proof of that persistence, a survival mechanism of a treasure designed not for plunder, but for preservation. And so, when we speak of the Templar treasure, we are speaking not only of what they carried, but of what they protected, not only of riches, but of revelations. A treasure of relics, knowledge, and perhaps truths too dangerous to reveal. Truths encoded, hidden, and entrusted to a future they would never see. A future that perhaps includes us, seekers peering into the shadows of history, searching for lines on a parchment that might lead us to the greatest secret of the Middle Ages. The rise of the Knights Templar seemed unstoppable. They had grown from 9 humble warriors into a transcontinental order wielding wealth, influence, and power that rivaled kings. Their banner flew across Europe and the Holy Land. Their commanderies stretched from Portugal to Jerusalem, and their names struck both awe and fear. But as history has shown time and again, what rises too high often attracts envy from those who stand below. The Templars' brilliance, their independence, and their secrecy became the very weapons used to bring them down. The fall of the Templars was not simply a collapse. It was a carefully orchestrated betrayal, a political and spiritual assassination carried out in the shadows. It began with a king in desperate need. Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, was a monarch weighed down by debt. His wars had drained his coffers, his governance was strained, and much of what he owed was owed to the Templars. They were his bankers, his creditors, and in his eyes, his masters. A king does not tolerate rivals, especially rivals dressed in the robes of monks who answer not to him, but to the Pope. And so, Philip began to weave a plan to erase his debts by erasing the order itself. Whispers of accusation became the first weapon. The Templars were accused of secret heresies, of blasphemous initiation rites, of worshipping strange idols, and spitting upon the cross. To the modern ear, these charges sound absurd, and perhaps that was their strength. They were so lurid, so shocking, that the public imagination could not resist them. In a world of deep superstition, the idea that a powerful brotherhood might secretly serve the devil was too dangerous to ignore. Philip needed only to plant the seed, and fear would do the rest. The decisive blow came on a date forever etched into history. Friday, October 13th, 1307. As dawn broke across France, royal agents carried sealed orders to every commandery. At the king's command, the Templars were seized en masse. Their properties were locked, their vaults confiscated, their brothers shackled and dragged before inquisitors. It was a coordinated strike, executed with ruthless precision. By sunset, the most powerful order in Christendom had been shattered. From that day forward, Friday the 13th carried a legacy of dread, said by some to originate from this single act of betrayal. What followed was a spectacle of cruelty. The imprisoned Templars were subjected to interrogation and torture. Many confessed under agony to crimes they had never committed, only to recant later when the pain ceased. Still, their forced confessions provided the justification Philip needed. The Pope, pressured and manipulated, reluctantly supported the king's actions, though in truth the Church itself was uneasy about the charges. Yet the machine of power had been set in motion, and there would be no turning back. Among those arrested was the Grand Master of the Order, Jacques de Molay. He had led the Templars for over 2 decades, guiding them through the loss of the Holy Land and the growing tensions with secular powers. Now, he stood as a prisoner of the very monarch he once aided. For 7 long years, he languished in captivity, a symbol of the Order's fate. At last, in 1314, he was led to the stake on an island in the Seine, burned alive as a heretic. But before the flames consumed him, he cried out a curse upon his enemies, summoning King Philip and Pope Clement to meet him before God within a year. Strangely enough, both men were dead within months, feeding the belief that the Templars carried with them powers unknown, even to their end. But while Philip celebrated his apparent victory, one question remained unresolved. Where was the treasure? For all the arrests, for all the confiscations, the vast fortune of the Templars seemed to evaporate. Inventories of seized properties reveal land, cattle, and coin, but nothing matching the immense wealth the Order was known to possess. The convoys said to have left Paris before the arrests were never accounted for. The fleet docked at La Rochelle was nowhere to be found. Some believed it sailed into the Atlantic, vanishing into the mist. Others whispered of underground tunnels and hidden vaults, emptied in the nights before the king's men arrived. It was as if the Templars had anticipated their downfall, preparing a last act of defiance. And this is where the legend of the map begins to take shape. If the Templars knew their time was short, if they suspected betrayal, then they would have devised a way to protect their greatest secrets. Some chronicles hint at coded documents smuggled out of France, entrusted to loyal brothers who fled north to Scotland, west to Portugal, or across the sea to destinations unknown. To those who believe, the map was one such safeguard, a document meant not for the betrayers, but for the faithful, a parchment that concealed, in geometry and symbol, the resting place of what the Templars held most sacred. The fall of the Templars was brutal, but it was not absolute. Their order was dissolved, their leaders executed, their name disgraced. Yet in pockets of Europe their legacy lived on. In Portugal, they re-emerged under a new name, the Order of Christ, carrying forward their traditions under royal protection. In Scotland, they are said to have fought at Bannockburn, their banners appearing suddenly on the battlefield to aid Robert the Bruce. And in secret societies centuries later, echoes of Templar rituals would resurface, claiming descent from those who escaped the purge. It is in this twilight, between destruction and survival, that the treasure mystery deepens. For if their enemies seized everything, the story would have ended in 1307. But the absence of their greatest hoard, the wealth, the relics, the knowledge, demands explanation. The arrests were sudden, the crackdown brutal, yet the treasure was gone. Gone, and perhaps marked on a chart hidden away, waiting for a future generation of seekers. The fall of the Templars was the fall of men, but not, perhaps, the fall of their secrets. Philip gained his vengeance. The Pope salvaged his authority, but the treasure and the whispers of a forbidden map slipped beyond their reach. And that gap, that silence in the record, is what gives the legend its enduring power. History tells us the Templars ended in fire and chains. The maps suggest they may have endured, not in name, but in mystery. The fall of the Knights Templar might have broken their order, but it did not erase the mystery that surrounded them. If anything, Their destruction only deepened the shadows, casting new questions across the centuries. Chief among them was this: what became of the Templar treasure? The official records of King Philip's seizure show lands, estates, livestock, and coin, the mundane assets of a wealthy organization. But missing from the tallies was the legendary hoard the Templars were said to command. Chroniclers and rivals alike spoke of mountains of silver, chalices of gold, priceless relics, and documents whose value surpassed any fortune in coin. And yet, when the dust settled, there was nothing. The treasure had vanished as though it had never existed at all. This absence was not a detail overlooked. Even in the 14th century, people whispered about the missing fortune. Royal officials, papal envoys, and ordinary citizens all asked the same question. How could an order that controlled vast resources simply leave nothing behind? The truth seemed too convenient, too neat, for those who had orchestrated the Templars' downfall. Philip had expected to inherit a kingdom's ransom. Instead, he found empty vaults. The first hints of a disappearance appear in accounts from Paris itself. On the night before the mass arrests of October 1307, it is said that wagons creaked out of the Templar stronghold, rolling through the darkened streets under cover of secrecy. They carried sealed chests, guarded by silent brothers, bound for destinations unknown. Some claimed the treasure was loaded onto the Seine, ferried downriver before the king's men arrived. Others believed the convoy never left the city, that it vanished into hidden cellars beneath the temple, sealed away beyond discovery. And then there was La Rochelle. The Templars possessed a powerful fleet, ships that connected their commanderies across Europe and the Mediterranean. But when royal forces arrived to seize them, the docks were bare. The ships had already departed, their crews vanishing into the Atlantic. Were they carrying the treasure, sailing westward into legend? Or had they slipped north to the shores of Scotland, where the excommunicated Robert the Bruce welcomed allies against England? The chroniclers do not agree, but they all note the same fact. The fleet was gone, and it never returned. Portugal, too, became a focal point of rumor. The Templars there were spared the worst of Philip's wrath. Their order was rebranded as the Order of Christ, and their estates remained largely intact. Some historians suggest that elements of the treasure were smuggled south before the arrests, hidden among the Portuguese commanderies where the King of France had no reach. In later centuries, it was this same Order of Christ that financed voyages of discovery, sending caravels across uncharted seas. Was it coincidence that the heirs of the Templars became the patrons of explorers who mapped the edges of the known world? Or was their expansion fueled by knowledge and wealth preserved from a purge? As the centuries passed, the absence of the treasure transformed from historical puzzle into fertile legend. Entire traditions grew around the idea that the Templars had hidden their hoard deliberately, safeguarding not only gold but relics of staggering importance. The Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, scrolls from Solomon's temple, secrets of alchemy, even knowledge of lost civilizations. The treasure ceased to be mere wealth. It became the repository of humanity's forbidden inheritance, too powerful to destroy, too dangerous to reveal. It is here that the idea of the map enters the story once more. If the Templars knew their fall was inevitable, then logic dictates they would have acted to secure what mattered most. They were disciplined, organized, and bound by secrecy. They had the means to hide their wealth and the wisdom to mark its location. But they would not have created a map in the ordinary sense, a parchment with an X marking the spot. No, their map, if it existed, would have been encoded in symbol and geometry, comprehensible only to the initiated. To outsiders, it would appear as decoration or perhaps as a harmless diagram. To the faithful, it would reveal the path to what had been hidden. Stories of such a map began to circulate in hushed voices long after the Order's destruction. Some spoke of a parchment smuggled to Scotland, where it lay in the safekeeping of brothers who had escaped the purge. Others hinted at a chart carried west, perhaps to the New World, where the treasure lay beneath untouched soil. And in Portugal, rumors persisted of coded documents preserved by the Order of Christ, their meanings cloaked beneath layers of sacred geometry. The absence of evidence only fueled belief. For treasure hunters and historians alike, the silence of the record became proof that something had been concealed. Why else would the official accounts omit any reference to the hoard? Why else would the Templar fleet vanish without trace? To the faithful seeker, the missing pieces were not gaps, but invitations, signs that the truth lay just beyond the veil. The vanishing of the treasure is not just a question of gold. It is the hinge on which the entire Templar legend turns. If the fortune was seized and squandered, then the story ends in 1307, with nothing more than a grim lesson in power and betrayal. But if it was hidden, spirited away in the final hours before the arrests, then the Templars achieved something greater. They defied the king, outwitted the crown, and ensured that their legacy endured. Not in vaults, but in mystery. Centuries later, explorers and adventurers would claim to have glimpsed fragments of this legacy. From a vault beneath Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland to the wooded shores of Nova Scotia's Oak Island, from the manuscripts of Portugal's archives to the cryptic designs etched into cathedral floors, seekers have pursued the ghost of the Templar treasure. Always they find traces, symbols, and echoes, but never the hoard itself. It remains absent, elusive, just beyond reach. And perhaps that is the greatest treasure of all, not the gold or relics themselves, but the enduring question. The vanishing of the Templar fortune transformed history into myth, fact into legend. It created a mystery so vast that it spans continents and centuries, drawing seekers into its orbit. And at the heart of it lies the tantalizing possibility that somewhere, hidden in plain sight, is a map that holds the key to the treasure that was never found. The Templars were betrayed, but they were not fools. Their order ended in chains, but their secrets may yet endure. The treasure vanished, but the absence left behind a presence, a silence that speaks louder than words. And in that silence, the legend of the Templars was born anew, carried forward not in armies or kingdoms, but in whispers, riddles, and the unending search for what was lost. If the Templars' treasure vanished without a trace, then the legend of the map was the thread that ensured the story never unraveled. The treasure was more than gold, more than relics. It was a mystery, and mysteries have a way of creating their own afterlives. By the 15th century, long after the last official Templar had been burned at the stake, whispers of a hidden chart began to circulate across Europe. A chart that did not simply mark the place where gold had been buried, but that contained within its symbols the key to the Templars' most guarded secret. The origins of this legend are as difficult to pin down as the treasure itself. Some traditions say that it began in Portugal, where the Templars survived under a new name, the Order of Christ. It was there that former Templars supposedly preserved documents smuggled from France before the arrests of 1307. Among them, rumor claimed, was a coded diagram, a drawing whose lines concealed sacred geometry, whose numbers aligned with biblical prophecy, and whose symbols traced the outline of a destination known only to the initiated. In Scotland, another story was told. There, Templars who had fled Philip's purge were said to have offered their loyalty to Robert the Bruce, fighting at his side in the Battle of Bannockburn. For their service, he granted them sanctuary. And in gratitude, the Templars entrusted Scotland with their most precious possession, not the treasure itself, but the instructions for how to find it. The Scottish map, as later seekers called it, was whispered to have been hidden beneath the foundations of Rosslyn Chapel, a structure already dripping with enigmatic carvings and esoteric symbolism. Meanwhile, on the fringes of France, tales persisted of monks who vanished into remote monasteries, carrying with them bundles of scrolls. One of these scrolls, said to have survived in a secret archive, contained the Path of the Grail. But to the uninitiated, it looked like nothing more than a decorated manuscript, filled with unfamiliar sigils, obscure references to Solomon's temple, and diagrams of stars. To those with the key, however, it pointed toward a physical location where the Templars had secured their hoard. The legends multiplied because they filled a vacuum. No official account of the treasure's fate could be trusted. The silence of the record begged to be filled. So storytellers, adventurers, and secret societies did just that. They gave shape to the absence. And in each of their tellings, the treasure became bound to a map, a hidden chart, encoded with esoteric knowledge, waiting for the worthy to decode it. It is easy, of course, to dismiss these legends as fabrications. Maps, after all, are the stuff of fairy tales and pirate stories. But here lies the peculiarity. The Templars were known for their skill in geometry, architecture, and navigation. They were not only warriors and bankers. They were builders of fortresses, chart makers of pilgrimage routes, and custodians of ancient knowledge. For an order so versed in symbols and secrecy, would it be strange for them to leave behind a chart, one that could be understood only by those trained in their ways? The map legend also intersects with broader currents of the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery. As Europe's horizons expanded, tales of hidden knowledge gained new weight. Explorers whispered of Templar charts that hinted at lands across the ocean long before Columbus. Some even claimed that the vanished fleet of La Rochelle had carried the treasure westward, and that the map was no mere drawing, but an encoded record of those voyages. In this telling, the Templar treasure was not buried in a vault, but hidden in a new world, and the map pointed the way. The map also became entangled with Grail lore. Medieval romances often depicted the Grail not as a chalice, but as a symbol, an idea, a code. Could the Grail itself have been the map? A vessel not of wine, but of knowledge, capable of guiding seekers to the sacred treasure? Some versions of the story suggest that the Grail legends were seeded by the Templars themselves, carefully disguising their chart within the language of myth. In such a framework, Arthurian tales were not fantasy, but encrypted instruction, their knights mirroring the Templars, their quests serving as allegories for the search. But the most enduring element of the legend is its secrecy. The map, if it exists, is never described plainly. Instead, it is said to be hidden in architecture, in paintings and manuscripts, in the alignments of cathedrals and the symbols carved into stone. A Templar map is not a folded parchment tucked into a chest. It is a code dispersed into the world, legible only to those who know the cipher. This concept gave rise to centuries of speculation. Was a map encoded into the floor plan of Chartres Cathedral, whose labyrinth spirals like a path to a hidden destination? Was it carved into Roslin's walls, where angels, vines, and cubes of stone seemed to speak a secret language? Or was it inscribed in the manuscripts of the Order of Christ, passed down to Portugal's navigators who would one day sail to the edges of the earth? The persistence of these stories reveals something important. People believed, across generations, that the Templars had hidden something extraordinary, and that it could be found, if only the map could be understood. For treasure seekers, this legend became fuel. For esoteric societies, it became dogma. For the ordinary dreamer, it became a tale to tell by candlelight, a reminder that history still held secrets waiting to be uncovered. The birth of a map legend was not a single event, but a chorus of whispers that stretched across centuries. Each time the Templar story was retold, the absence of the treasure gave rise to new interpretations. And in every retelling, the idea of a map grew stronger, more essential, until it became inseparable from the myth itself. The irony is striking. A treasure that may or may not have existed gave rise to a map that may or may not have been drawn. Yet both became real in the minds of those who pursued them. And in that belief, they acquired a kind of existence stronger than fact. By the 16th century, the Templar map was no longer a rumor, but a motif woven into the imagination of Europe. From whispered Grail quests to the voyages of discovery, from Roslin Chapel to the Atlantic shores, the idea that a chart existed, a guide to the final resting place of the Templar horde, had become inseparable from the legend of the order itself. And so the story deepens. The Templars' treasure vanished, but in its place, something more powerful was born, a mythic chart, a hidden map, a promise of discovery that has never quite faded. If the legend of the Templar map was born in whispers, Then its clues were said to linger in stone and parchment, scattered like fragments of a puzzle across Europe. The treasure itself may have disappeared, but in the centuries that followed, seekers became convinced that the Templars had left behind a trail of breadcrumbs, encoded in the very fabric of their churches, castles, and manuscripts. To those who looked closely, the ordinary became extraordinary, a pattern of symbols, a cryptic margin note, an alignment of stone that seemed to point beyond itself. One of the most enduring examples is Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Built in the mid-15th century, long after the Templars' official suppression, Rosslyn nevertheless pulses with their aura. Its walls are a labyrinth of symbols, angels, vines, stars, cubes, and geometric forms repeated with obsessive precision. Some claim these carvings conceal not only Masonic lore, but also the remnants of Templar knowledge. Within the chapel's vaulted ceiling lies a pattern of stars that seems less decorative than instructional, as if charting a path to something hidden. Could Rosslyn itself be a fragment of the map, its architecture doubling as a cipher? Then there is Chartres Cathedral in France, a structure built with the kind of mathematical precision that has puzzled scholars for centuries. At its heart lies the great labyrinth etched into the floor. To the faithful, it symbolized a pilgrimage within sacred space. To esoteric thinkers, it was something more, a coded map. Its spirals may represent not only spiritual journeys, but physical ones, tracing lines of latitude, longitude, or celestial pathways. Some even argue that the labyrinth, when overlaid with certain Templar routes, points toward specific regions of Europe where treasure may have been hidden. Manuscripts, too, bear suspicious traces. Illuminated codices produced in monastic scriptoria often carry elaborate marginalia, vines curling into strange symbols, beasts drawn with unnatural geometry, stars placed in deliberate sequence. Historians sometimes dismiss these flourishes as medieval whimsy. Yet in certain manuscripts linked to Templar commanderies, the patterns seem too consistent, too deliberate. There are accounts of diagrams whose angles match the alignments of Templar fortresses across Europe, as though the scribes encoded geography into art. To the untrained eye, it is decoration. To the initiated, perhaps, it is instruction. One of the more tantalizing claims comes from Portugal. In the archives of Tomar, once the headquarters of the Order of Christ, researchers have noted manuscripts filled with diagrams of spheres and grids. Officially, these are cosmological sketches, reflecting medieval understandings of heaven and earth. But some believe there is something more, navigational charts disguised as theology, guides to coastlines long before European maps recorded them. If so, these documents could represent the hidden continuation of the Templar map, the knowledge that guided Portuguese explorers across uncharted seas. Even smaller details, almost invisible, have been interpreted as clues. The cross petit, emblem of the Templars, appears again and again in unexpected contexts. Carved into stones where no knight is recorded, etched into manuscripts unrelated to crusades. Sometimes, when plotted across regions, these crosses form strange geometric alignments, as if marking waypoints on a grander chart. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps these were the signatures of a code hidden in plain sight, available to anyone who knew how to read it. Stone castles also tell their own stories. Many Templar fortresses in Europe were built with unusual precision in their orientation. Some align not to strategic advantage, but to celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, or particular star risings. Why would warrior monks concern themselves with such details? For some, the answer is simple. They were embedding astronomical markers into their architecture, creating a network of stone observatories. And perhaps, when read together, these observatories pointed the way to something far greater, a treasure hidden at the end of a celestial alignment. It is this blending of the cosmic and the earthly that makes the supposed Templar clues so fascinating. The map, if it exists, is not a simple chart of roads or rivers. It is a tapestry woven from sacred geometry, astronomy, and symbolism. The Templars, steeped in both mysticism and practicality, may well have created a system of markers that straddled the line between spiritual allegory and physical geography. To seek the treasure, one had to be both mathematician and mystic. And yet, there is a danger here. For centuries, seekers have been led astray by patterns that dissolve upon closer inspection. Humans are adept at finding meaning in chaos, at drawing lines between stars until constellations appear. Could the supposed clues in stone and manuscript be nothing more than coincidence? The overinterpretation of medieval art and architecture? Skeptics argue precisely this. The labyrinth of Chartres, they say, was a common symbol of Christian pilgrimage. The carvings of Rosslyn are the product of Renaissance stonemasons, not surviving Templars. The crosses scattered across Europe are relics of faith, not secret signposts. But to the dreamer, the skeptic's dismissal rings hollow. For what if the very ordinariness of these features was the point? A true Templar map would not declare itself openly. It would be disguised in the most mundane of details, hiding significance beneath the veil of ritual and decoration. To cloak a treasure, what better way than to bury its instructions in plain sight, woven into the stones of cathedrals and the margins of sacred texts? This duality between skepticism and belief is what sustains the legend. Each cathedral, each manuscript, each alignment becomes both an object of faith and a canvas of speculation. A pilgrim kneeling at Chartres may see only a labyrinth of devotion. A seeker of secrets may see a map unfurling at his feet. Both interpretations coexist, neither disproving the other. The allure of these clues is not merely in their mystery, but in their promise. They suggest that the past is not silent, that the Templars did not vanish without leaving a trace. Instead, they whisper across centuries, hiding their message in stone and ink. And if one could only decode that message, it would lead, inexorably, to the treasure's final resting place. It is this conviction that has propelled generations of seekers to pore over cathedrals, manuscripts, and ruins, convinced that the Templars' greatest legacy is not their wealth, but their riddle. And in the search for that riddle, the map is reborn again and again, not as parchment, but as an idea etched into the very fabric of history. The legend of the Templar map cannot be separated from another thread woven tightly into their myth: the world of secret codes, hidden alphabets, and esoteric knowledge. If the treasure was hidden, and if the Templars left instructions on how to find it, then those instructions could never be written in plain sight. They would be disguised, encrypted, preserved in a language understood only by the initiated. And in the medieval world, no one was more skilled in such symbolic cloaking than the warrior monks who straddled the realms of sword and scripture. The Templars were not mere soldiers. They were administrators, bankers, engineers, and scholars. Their commanderies stretched from Jerusalem to the coasts of Spain, and their work required a mastery of record-keeping and communication. To protect their wealth and strategies, they likely relied on codes and ciphers, tools of secrecy that have long since been forgotten by mainstream history. Indeed, fragments of this hidden language may linger still, scattered across Europe in manuscripts, carvings, and architecture. One of the most famous examples is the Templar cipher, sometimes called the Pigpen cipher. Though often associated with later Freemasons, its roots may reach back to the Templars themselves. This system uses grids and geometric shapes to replace letters with symbols. To the untrained eye, a series of marks looks like meaningless scratches. To the initiate, it forms a clear message. If the Templars did rely on such ciphers, they could have encoded maps, routes, or instructions without fear of discovery. A parchment covered in geometric marks would pass unnoticed, unless the reader knew the key. Sacred geometry itself may have been one of their codes. Medieval builders saw mathematics not just as science, but as theology, a reflection of divine order. Circles, triangles, and proportions were imbued with meaning. The Templars, custodians of both Eastern and Western traditions, may have absorbed mystical knowledge from their time in the Holy Land, incorporating Kabbalistic thought Islamic geometry, and Greek philosophy. To them, geometry was not mere ornamentation. It was a language, and through it, they could inscribe truths into stone, truths that doubled as directions for those who could read the shapes. Esoteric manuscripts provide tantalizing glimpses into this mindset. Some texts, like the Book of Abramelin or the works of Ramon Llull, contain dense layers of symbolism, seemingly designed to obscure as much as they reveal. While not explicitly linked to the Templars, they belong to the intellectual world that shaped them. Codes hidden in numerology, acrostics, and alchemical diagrams created a kind of double vision, one meaning for the lay reader, another for the initiated. If the Templars encoded their map, it may well have followed this principle, an outward face of piety concealing an inward message of location and legacy. The Grail romances themselves may have been coded texts. When Chrétien de Troyes and Wolfram von Eschenbach wrote of knights in search of a sacred object, were they spinning tales of Christian devotion, or were they masking an encrypted narrative about the Templars' own hidden quest? Eschenbach, in particular, described the Grail not as a cup but as a stone, radiant, eternal, mysterious. Some scholars interpret this as a metaphor for wisdom preserved, or perhaps for a relic too dangerous to describe plainly. Could the Grail stories have been the Templars' own way of smuggling their secret into popular culture, cloaked as allegory? Numbers, too, played their role. The Templars were obsessed with the number 8, a symbol of renewal and eternity. Many of their chapels were built with octagonal designs, echoing the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, a structure they occupied during their earliest years. Was this architectural preference simply homage, or did it serve as a coded reference to something deeper? Some researchers argue that octagonal layouts, when plotted across Europe, form geometric patterns pointing to hidden sites. Once again, what appears symbolic may double as cartographic. The ciphers were not only mathematical or geometric. Music, too, offered a hidden language. Gregorian chants, with their complex notations, could conceal patterns. Some modern researchers suggest that the arrangement of notes in certain Templar-related manuscripts corresponds with geographic coordinates. A hymn might praise God on the surface, while its deeper pattern mapped a path to treasure. Whether fanciful or true, such interpretations remind us that medieval people often wove meaning into every layer of their art. And then there's the matter of Kabbalah, Jewish mystical tradition that flourished in the very lands where the Templars were most active. The Kabbalistic use of letters, numbers, and divine names as vehicles of hidden meaning may have influenced the order profoundly. If Templar scribes adopted these methods, then their documents could contain far more than meets the eye. A prayer might double as a code, a psalm as a cipher, a string of letters as a set of directions disguised as devotion. The secrecy surrounding esoteric knowledge has always fueled speculation about the Templars. Were they initiates of lost wisdom, guardians of ancient mysteries? Or were they practical men, employing the codes of their day to secure communications? Either way, the idea of hidden language is central to the legend of the map. A treasure could not be protected by walls alone. It had to be shielded by obscurity, locked away in riddles that only the worthy could solve. Of course, skeptics argue that no such codes exist, or if they did, they were banal. Medieval ciphers, they note, were often simple substitutions, not the labyrinthine systems romanticized by later generations. The Pigpen cipher, for example, appears in post-Templar contexts, making its attribution speculative. Sacred geometry, they say, reflects medieval religiosity, not secret maps. But here, as always, the absence of proof only feeds the hunger for mystery. For believers, the simplicity of medieval codes makes them all the more tantalizing. What if the key has been in front of us all along? The persistence of this idea reveals something profound. The Templar treasure is not simply about gold and relics. It is about hidden knowledge, a body of wisdom encrypted against time, waiting to be unlocked. The map, in this sense, is not merely a guide to a physical place. It is a cipher itself, a symbolic construct that can only be deciphered by those attuned to the language of the esoteric. And so, the search continues. Seekers pore over manuscripts, measure cathedral walls, trace labyrinths, and hum forgotten hymns, convinced that a code lies beneath the surface. Each discovery, a geometric alignment, a strange symbol, a cryptic inscription, feels like a fragment of the hidden map. Whether or not it leads to treasure, it leads to something deeper. The conviction that the world itself is a cipher, and the Templars were its hidden readers. The story of secret codes and esoteric knowledge does more than embellish the Templar myth. It transforms it. For if the treasure lies hidden behind symbols and ciphers, then its pursuit is not just an adventure, but an initiation. To seek the map is to walk the path of the mystic, to learn to see what others overlook, to unlock a language woven into stone, scripture, and song. The story of the Templar map is inseparable from the legend of the Holy Grail. Across centuries, storytellers, chroniclers, and mystics have woven these two threads together until they are nearly indistinguishable. The hidden treasure of the Knights and the most sacred relic in Christendom. Some believe the Grail itself was the treasure the Templars carried away from Jerusalem. Others argue that the Grail was never an object at all, but a symbol of knowledge, encoded into the very map they left behind. But before we explore the connection, we must understand what the Grail meant to the medieval imagination. The first literary mention of the Grail appears in Chrétien de Troyes, Perceval, around 1180, the very age of the Templars' greatest power. In his unfinished romance, the Grail is not yet the chalice of Christ, but a mysterious, radiant vessel carried through a king's hall, feeding the sick, restoring life. Later writers, like Robert de Boron, Christianized the story, transforming the Grail into the cup used at the Last Supper and to catch Christ's blood at the crucifixion. From there, the legend spread across Europe, becoming the centerpiece of Arthurian myth. It is in this same period that the Templars were at their zenith. And here lies the first tantalizing overlap. Both the Templars and the Grail stories emerge from the same cultural soil, both connected to Jerusalem, both linked to themes of sacred guardianship. Was this coincidence or deliberate allegory? Wolfram von Eschenbach, writing in the early 13th century, pushed the mystery even further. His Parzival describes the Grail not as a cup, but as a stone, the lapis exilis. This stone, he claimed, had miraculous powers, sustaining those who served it, granting eternal life. Even more intriguingly, Wolfram connects the Grail to a group of knights called the Templars, a term many believe to be a thinly veiled reference to the Knights Templar. If Wolfram's account carries even a kernel of truth, the Grail legend was consciously tied to the Templars during their lifetime. This raises a provocative question. What if the Grail stories were never mere romance, but coded narratives pointing toward the Templars' hidden possession? Some researchers suggest the Grail was a relic smuggled out of Jerusalem when the Knights established their headquarters on the Temple Mount. Could it have been the cup itself? Or perhaps something else? The Ark of the Covenant, lost since antiquity, or manuscripts revealing secret knowledge of Christ's bloodline? To medieval Christians, any of these would have been beyond priceless. And if the Templars carried such a relic into hiding, they would have needed to conceal its location, perhaps through a map veiled in esoteric symbols. Others argue that the Grail was never physical but intellectual, a body of secret knowledge the Knights preserved, passed on in encrypted form. The stone of Wolfram's Grail could represent wisdom, crystallized into permanence. If so, then the treasure map itself might not lead to gold but to revelation, truths about Christianity that could shake its foundations. This interpretation explains why later secret societies, particularly the Freemasons and Rosicrucians, adopted Grail imagery. For them, the quest was for enlightenment, not objects. The geographical link between Grail sites and Templar strongholds deepens the intrigue. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, built by descendants of Templars, brims with symbols often interpreted as Grail-related. green men, coded geometries, and carving some claim depict New World made centuries before Columbus. In France, the village of Rennes-le-Château, a place steeped in Grail lore, also carries legends of Templar involvement. Across Spain and Portugal, churches associated with the Knights contain Grail-like imagery, suggesting that wherever the Templars went, the myth followed. Even the supposed guardians of the Grail in legend, knights sworn to protect it from corruption, mirror the Templars themselves. Warrior monks, sworn to poverty, yet entrusted with unearthly wealth, living halfway between myth and history. Perhaps medieval authors were not inventing fantasy, but recasting reality through the lens of allegory, encoding the Templars' role into stories that could survive their eventual suppression. When Pope Clement V and King Philip IV destroyed the order in 1307, the Grail stories took on new urgency. Suddenly, the Grail became not just a symbol of divine mystery, but also a vessel of resistance. The knights might have been executed, but their treasure, their Grail, was said to have vanished, spirited away beyond the reach of kings. This absence gave birth to one of the most powerful legends of all, that the Grail, like the Templar treasure, is hidden, waiting for those worthy to find it. Skeptics, of course, point out that the Grail legends were literary, born of courtly culture, with little connection to history. Yet even they admit the parallels are uncanny. Why would Wolfram link the Grail to the Templars? Why would Grail imagery proliferate in Templar lands? The skeptic's dismissal does not erase the symbolism. Instead, it highlights what makes the Grail myth so enduring: its ability to exist in two worlds at once, the poetic and the historical, the spiritual and the material. The Grail connection also reframes the map itself. If the Templars encoded directions to their treasure, they may have disguised them in Grail symbolism. A chalice carved into stone could indicate not a relic, but a location. A stone of light in a poem could correspond to a landmark. A tale of knights riding toward a Grail castle might hide a geographic itinerary across Europe. To those who can read the allegory, the romances become more than literature. They become fragments of a treasure map. Ultimately, whether the Grail was a cup, a stone, or a symbol, its meaning converges with the Templar myth in one crucial way. It represents something hidden, guarded, and transformative. The Grail is always more than it appears, just as the Templar's treasure is always more than gold. Both promise a kind of revelation, a lifting of the veil. And so, for seekers of the Templar map, the Grail becomes both a guide and a goal. The quest is not only to locate treasure, but to understand its deeper meaning. To pursue the Grail is to embrace mystery, to accept that the journey itself is initiation. The Templar map, in this light, is not a set of coordinates. It is a spiritual path, encoded in symbol and story, waiting for the persistent and the faithful to uncover. The Grail connection has ensured that the Templar legend will never fade. For even if the treasure is never found, the Grail remains. Not as an object locked away in stone, but as an idea, shimmering, eternal, drawing seekers onward. A mirror, perhaps, of the very quest that has defined humanity for millennia. The hunger for what lies beyond the visible. The belief that somewhere, hidden in plain sight, there is a key to the divine. The trail of the Templar treasure, like the shifting course of a river, eventually leads us across the Atlantic to the shores of the so-called New World. Here, a bold and controversial theory takes root: that long before Columbus, perhaps as early as the 14th century, the Knights Templar, or their successors, set sail into the western seas, carrying with them the most precious cargo of all: the hidden treasure, relics, and perhaps even the Grail itself. At first glance, such an idea sounds impossible. How could a medieval order, outlawed by the Pope in 1307 and hounded across Europe, have mounted an expedition across an ocean unknown to Europeans? Yet, when we look closer, the pieces of this puzzle begin to align in ways both uncanny and disturbing. To begin, we must remember that the Templars were no strangers to the sea. They possessed their own fleet of ships, headquartered at La Rochelle on the French coast. When the order was destroyed on that infamous Friday the 13th, many of these ships mysteriously vanished. Chroniclers record that on the morning of the arrests, a fleet sailed from La Rochelle under cover of darkness, never to be seen again. Where did they go? Theories range from Scotland to Portugal, from the Baltic to the Mediterranean, and some whisper to lands beyond the horizon. The idea that they could cross the Atlantic is not as implausible as it once seemed. Evidence suggests that Norse explorers, like Leif Erikson, had reached North America centuries earlier. By the 14th century, maritime technology was advanced enough to support such voyages. The Templars had connections with Portugal, whose navigators would later spearhead the Age of Discovery. Could the Knights, desperate and resourceful, have attempted the crossing themselves? Legends in Scotland lend weight to this possibility. The Sinclair family, closely tied to the Templars, is said to have carried their legacy after the suppression. Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, has long been a figure of fascination in this context. According to the controversial Zeno narrative, Sinclair voyaged westward around 1398, reaching lands that many identify as Nova Scotia. The Zeno account, though debated, describes contact with native peoples, the building of stone structures, and the planting of European banners in distant soil. Some see this as nothing less than the continuation of the Templar mission in exile. Supporting this are the enigmatic stone carvings found at Rosslyn Chapel, built by Sinclair's descendants. Among the intricate designs are what appear to be depictions of maize and aloe, plants native to the Americas, yet supposedly unknown in Europe before Columbus. If genuine, these carvings are either a remarkable coincidence or proof that knowledge of the New World circulated among Sinclair's circle. Could this knowledge have come from Templar voyages westward, carrying the treasure map not only across seas, but into history itself? In North America, a trail of strange evidence emerges. The Newport Tower in Rhode Island, a circular stone structure with architectural features resembling medieval design, has long been linked to the Templars. Some claim it was built as a watchtower or chapel by early European arrivals, perhaps by knights safeguarding something hidden nearby. In Minnesota, the Kensington runestone, discovered in 1898, bears an inscription in runes describing a 14th century expedition by Norsemen, possibly accompanied by Templar survivors or their allies. While scholars often dismiss it as a hoax, others insist the weathering of the stone and the linguistic quirks point to authenticity. Even more mysterious is Oak Island, off the coast of Nova Scotia. For over 2 centuries, treasure hunters have dug into its fabled money pit, a complex shaft filled with booby traps and hidden chambers. Symbols carved into stones on the island resemble Masonic and Templar imagery. Some researchers argue the entire site is a massive treasure vault constructed by exiled Templars or their successors, hiding relics from Jerusalem, manuscripts of lost knowledge, or even the Grail itself. Though no definitive treasure has been recovered, the layers of secrecy, engineering, and legend echo the Templars' reputation for cunning concealment. Of course, mainstream historians remain skeptical. They argue that the Zeno narrative was fabricated centuries after the fact, that Rosslyn carvings are misinterpreted, that the Newport Tower was a colonial windmill, and that Oak Island's mystery stems from natural geology or 19th century invention. Yet skeptics cannot fully explain away the convergence of clues. Vanished fleets, transatlantic legends, and symbols scattered across continents. If it is coincidence, it is a pattern of coincidence so striking that it borders on design. The New World theory also fits with the deeper narrative of the Templar treasure. If the Knights carried with them not just gold but sacred relics, relics that could alter the course of religion and politics, hiding them in Europe would have been perilous. Kings and popes scoured the continent for signs of the treasure. Only in lands beyond their reach, across an ocean few dared to cross, could such relics be secured. North America, with its vast forests, isolated islands, and native alliances, would have offered both concealment and protection. Some esoteric traditions go even further, claiming that the Templars did not simply hide their treasure in the New World, but established secret colonies there. These enclaves, hidden in valleys or coastal fortresses, allegedly preserved the Order's knowledge and rights, waiting for the day when it could resurface. Stories of white-bearded strangers arriving in canoes among native tribes, teaching advanced knowledge of the stars or agriculture, are sometimes cited as echoes of such encounters. Whether one believes these accounts or not, the New World theory transforms the Templar legend into a global saga. It suggests that the treasure map does not end in Europe or the Near East, but stretches across oceans, connecting continents, weaving the Grail myth into the very discovery of the Americas. It implies that the so-called Age of Exploration was not the beginning of transatlantic contact, but its rediscovery, a reawakening of a path first charted in secrecy centuries earlier. This theory also resonates with the symbolism of the Grail. In Arthurian legend, the Grail is always hidden in a distant, perilous land, accessible only to the worthy after a long quest. What could be more fitting than placing it across an ocean, in lands unknown, where only the most daring knights, the Templars, could reach it? The New World becomes not just geography, but myth made manifest, the faraway Grail castle of medieval imagination. In the end, the New World theory remains one of the most debated and tantalizing chapters of the Templar saga. It challenges history's boundaries, asking us to consider whether the treasure map was not just a guide to a buried chest, but a chart across the seas, pointing toward lands that would one day reshape the world. If true, it means the Templars not only safeguarded their treasure, they rewrote the destiny of continents. And even if false, the very persistence of the theory reveals something powerful. The human hunger to believe that history is deeper, stranger, and more interconnected than textbooks admit. That somewhere, buried beneath soil or stone in the New World, lies a secret capable of rewriting the story of the West. A secret encoded on a hidden map, waiting to be revealed. If the Templar treasure was too dangerous to hide openly, then secrecy became their greatest weapon. Across Europe and beyond, the trail of the hidden map may not lie in one single document, but scattered through symbols, carvings, and manuscripts. Each piece, on its own, appears enigmatic or decorative, but together, they form a mosaic of meaning, a code meant to outlast kings, inquisitors, and centuries of silence. The Templars, more than any medieval order, understood the power of secrecy. Their military campaigns required it, their banking system depended on it, and their esoteric rituals thrived on it. When their downfall came in 1307, those who survived likely knew their only chance of preserving the Order's greatest secret was to encrypt it into forms that seemed harmless to outsiders, but would speak to the initiated. We begin with the stones themselves. In southern France, within the Languedoc region, lies a network of ruined castles once associated with the Cathars and later whispered to shelter fleeing Templars. Among their crumbling walls are symbols carved into doorways and lintels. Crosses with equal arms, circles divided into quarters, stars with 6 points. Scholars dismiss many of these as common medieval decoration, but others argue they are markers, aligning with the sun at solstices or pointing toward hidden chambers below. Could these be fragments of a coded map, etched in a stone so no parchment could betray it? The most famous of these enigmatic sites is Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Built in the mid-15th century by William Sinclair, a family with Templar ties, Rosslyn overflows with imagery that has baffled historians for centuries. Columns spiral with vines, angels play bagpipes, and patterns repeat with mathematical precision. Some carvings seem to correspond to musical notes, creating what researchers call the Rosslyn motet. Others depict plants like maize and aloe, as mentioned earlier, suggesting knowledge of distant lands. For some, Rosslyn is not a church but a cipher in stone, a three-dimensional manuscript encoding where the treasure lies. One particularly striking feature is the apprentice pillar, said to represent the tree of life. Its twisted form, adorned with dragons and vines, may conceal Masonic and Templar symbology, clues pointing to ancient wisdom preserved in secret. Some believe its base once held a hidden compartment, perhaps containing scrolls or a fragment of the treasure map itself. Though nothing has been proven, the aura of coded secrecy clings to Rosslyn like incense. Manuscripts, too, carry whispers of the hidden map. The Chinon parchment, discovered in the Vatican secret archives in 2001, revealed that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templars of heresy, even as he allowed their destruction publicly. This duality, hidden truth preserved in ink, is exactly the kind of trick the Knights themselves might have employed. If absolution could be buried in a parchment for centuries, why not a map encoded in allegory? One candidate often cited is the so-called Voynich manuscript, written in the 15th century in an unknown script, filled with bizarre plants, celestial diagrams, and women bathing in strange tubs. It has resisted all attempts at translation. While mainstream scholars date it slightly later than the Templars, some esoteric researchers argue it is a coded survival of Templar knowledge, perhaps even a cartographic cipher hiding geographic coordinates within its illustrations. If true, then every strange star and route is not random, but a step along the map. In Spain and Portugal, medieval manuscripts also hint at hidden knowledge. Marginalia in religious texts show knights kneeling not before Christ, but before chalices or radiant stones. These images, overlooked by censors, may be subtle allusions to the Grail and its guardians. Some codices even feature labyrinth-like drawings, spirals that could double as geographic mnemonics. Were these flourishes the playful doodles of bored scribes, or carefully embedded waypoints for future initiates? Masonic symbolism, too, must be considered. Freemasonry, which emerged centuries after the Templars, claims descent from their traditions. Within Masonic lodges, geometric symbols like the square and compass, the all-seeing eye, and the letter G dominate. Some researchers argue these symbols are not only spiritual emblems, but map markers. Triangles, for instance, may encode triangulation methods for navigation. The G, often said to stand for God or geometry, might equally stand for Grail. If Freemasonry inherited the Templar legacy, then their ritual symbols are a continuation of the coded map. Another fascinating artifact is the Pyrie Reis map of 1513. Though drawn by an Ottoman admiral, it shows astonishingly accurate coastlines of South America and Antarctica. Some claim it was compiled from older charts, possibly preserved by Templars or their successors. If true, it suggests the treasure map did not merely survive. It traveled through time, disguised within other maps, passed hand to hand among secretive circles. The use of codes and ciphers was not foreign to the Middle Ages. The Templars, who handled international correspondence and banking, had access to cryptographic methods centuries before they became mainstream. Simple substitution ciphers, geometric grids, and steganography, hiding information within images, were tools of survival. It would be entirely in character for them to embed the location of their greatest treasure within illuminated manuscripts or church frescoes, invisible to those who did not know the key. One particularly haunting possibility is that the Templar map exists not as a single artifact, but as a puzzle spread across dozens of sites and manuscripts. A carved symbol in France aligns with a manuscript illustration in Portugal, which matches a star pattern in Rosslyn, which in turn corresponds to a waypoint across the Atlantic. Only by assembling these fragments could the true path be revealed. In this sense, the hidden map is less a parchment and more a global tapestry of codes, scattered, concealed, waiting for a patient seeker to piece them together. Mainstream historians, of course, caution against overinterpretation. Symbols, they argue, were common currency in medieval art, and most had well understood religious meanings. The cross, the chalice, the vine, all were standard motifs. To see them as secret maps is to risk projecting fantasies on a stone. Yet the persistence of these theories cannot be dismissed so easily. For if even one carving or manuscript was deliberately coded, then the entire edifice of orthodoxy begins to tremble. The fascination with coded symbols reveals something profound about the Templar mythos. The treasure is not merely material wealth, but meaning itself, knowledge concealed, revealed only to those who seek beyond the surface. Every carved rose, every mysterious rune, becomes a doorway into mystery. And perhaps that is the true genius of the Templar Code. It forces us to look again, to see the world not as ordinary, but as layered, symbolic, alive with hidden maps. Thus, the quest continues not only in archives and ruins, but in the imagination of every seeker. The treasure map, scattered in stone and manuscript, becomes both a historical enigma and a spiritual allegory. It teaches that truth is never obvious, that the path is always hidden, that revelation must be earned. And in this sense, the Templars succeeded. For their secret, whatever it may be, remains intact, tantalizing, enduring, encoded in the stones of cathedrals and the margins of forgotten books, waiting for those who dare to read the code. Every great mystery has not only guardians, but also adversaries. If the Templars truly preserved a map to their treasure, whether it pointed to gold, relics, or forbidden knowledge, then the Catholic Church had every reason to ensure it never surfaced. The history of the Templars is, in many ways, a history of suppression, of secrets kept, of truths erased, of stories rewritten. And within this suppression lies perhaps the greatest clue of all, that there was something worth silencing. To understand the Church's hostility, we must return to the 12th and 13th centuries. At their height, the Templars were not only warrior monks, but also bankers, landowners, and power brokers. Their network stretched across Europe, rivaling the influence of kings. Their headquarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem placed them in contact with traditions far older than Christianity. Rumors swirled that they discovered relics, scrolls, or even heretical knowledge during their excavations there. In a world where the Church guarded truth as tightly as treasure, such discoveries would have been destabilizing. When King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Templars, pressured Pope Clement V into destroying the order in 1307, the official charges included heresy, blasphemy, and devil worship. Historians today recognize these accusations as fabricated, torture-induced confessions designed to smear the order. Yet one detail stands out. Among the charges was the claim that the Knights worshipped a head and engaged in secret rituals. Skeptical scholars dismiss this as invention. But what if the Church was attempting to cloak something real in scandalous imagery? What if the Templars possessed a relic or symbol that threatened orthodox teaching? Consider the possibility that the head was not demonic but sacred, perhaps even the head of John the Baptist, a relic long rumored to have circulated in the Near East. Or perhaps it was a metaphor for knowledge itself, for wisdom the Knights preserved in hidden manuscripts. If the Templars had uncovered records suggesting an alternative history of Christ, a bloodline, or the true Grail, such revelations would have undermined the Church's monopoly on salvation. No wonder Clement and Philip acted so ruthlessly. But suppression did not end with arrests. For centuries afterward, chroniclers writing under Church authority portrayed the Templars as either villains or tragic martyrs. Little was said about their treasure, their maps, or their relics. Archives were sealed, documents destroyed or hidden. Only hints survived in folklore, whispered in villages near Templar ruins, or encoded in ballads and romances. This silence is itself suspicious. If there was nothing to hide, why was so much erased? The case of the Chinon parchment, rediscovered only in 2001, illustrates this perfectly. For 700 years, the world believed that the Pope condemned the Templars entirely. Yet the parchment revealed that Clement had secretly absolved them. Why hide such a critical truth unless the Church wished to maintain a false narrative? If absolution could be buried for centuries, how many other documents, perhaps including references to a treasure map, remain locked in the Vatican archives, away from public eyes? The Vatican's secret archives, spanning miles of shelving, hold countless manuscripts unavailable to researchers. Permission to view them is limited, and even when granted, requests must be highly specific. Rumors abound that among these collections are Templar documents, maps, codices, or correspondences confiscated during the trials. If so, the Church may still be the unwilling custodian of the very map we seek. There is also the matter of continuity. After the Templars' fall, their lands and properties were largely transferred to the Knights Hospitaller. But some historians note that the Hospitallers did not inherit everything. Key sites, especially in remote regions, were abandoned or quietly absorbed by local nobility sympathetic to the Templars. What happened to the archives, the charters, and the coded manuscripts that surely existed in these places? It is possible that some slipped through the Church's net, hidden in monasteries or private libraries. Yet wherever traces of them appeared, censorship often followed. Manuscripts went missing. Heretical works were burned. Even during the Renaissance, when ancient knowledge was rediscovered, whispers of Templar secrets were carefully excised from official history. The opposition was not merely institutional, but theological. For the Church, the Grail myth was dangerous precisely because it suggested that divine power could exist outside its control. If the Grail was real and hidden, who controlled it? Not the Pope. If the treasure included texts undermining the crucifixion or Christ's uniqueness, then the Church's entire structure of authority crumbled. Thus, any trace of the treasure map, any suggestion that holy relics or heretical documents were concealed, had to be suppressed. Some researchers argue that this suppression continued into the modern age. In the 19th century, when interest in Templar and Grail legends surged, many excavations near Templar sites were mysteriously halted, or discoveries quickly vanished into private hands. At Rennes-le-Château, the enigmatic French priest Béranger Saunière reportedly stumbled upon something extraordinary in the late 1800s, parchments hidden within his church. He became suddenly wealthy, renovated the building with bizarre Grail imagery, and left behind cryptic inscriptions. The Church eventually silenced his activities, transferring his findings into secrecy. Was Saunière's discovery a fragment of the Templar map, suppressed once again by ecclesiastical authority? Skeptics claim that the Church's suppression was motivated purely by political necessity, not by hidden treasure. To them, the Templars represented a rival power that had to be neutralized, and accusations of heresy were the simplest weapon. Yet even skeptics admit that the extent of document destruction and archival control was unusual. Rarely in history has an institution worked so thoroughly to erase every trace of a group's inner life. Something more than politics seems at work. And yet, suppression always leaves shadows. The very absence of documents invites speculation. The very silence of the Vatican archives fuels curiosity. Like negative space in a painting, what is missing becomes just as telling as what remains. By attempting to bury the truth, the Church may have inadvertently preserved its aura of mystery, ensuring that seekers would continue to pursue it. Ultimately, the story of Church opposition frames the hidden map in stark terms. If the treasure were merely gold, it could have been seized, spent, and forgotten. But if it was knowledge powerful enough to shake the foundations of faith, then suppression was inevitable. The map, therefore, is not only a guide to hidden relics, but a symbol of forbidden truth concealed by those who feared its consequences. And so, the Templar map exists in a kind of twilight, hidden not only by time, but by deliberate design, erased not only by centuries of decay, but by the hand of authority. The Church's opposition tells us that there was indeed something to conceal, something worth rewriting history to protect. What that something is, treasure, Grail, or revelation, remains the question. But one thing is certain: suppression is always the shadow cast by light. And where there is a shadow, there is a source. The story of the Templar treasure map does not belong solely to the past. In fact, much of its allure comes from the way it continues to resurface generation after generation, drawing explorers, treasure hunters, and amateur historians into its orbit. Every century since the fall of the Templars has witnessed rediscoveries. Strange documents appearing in unexpected places, coded carvings on forgotten ruins, or whispered rumors of hidden chests buried beneath castles and chapels. And with each rediscovery, a new wave of seekers sets out to chase the mystery, often risking everything for a prize that may not even exist. One of the most famous modern rediscoveries is linked to the island of Oak Island in Nova Scotia, Canada. The legend begins in the late 18th century, when local boys stumbled upon a curious depression in the ground. Digging revealed layers of logs at precise intervals, as though someone had engineered an elaborate shaft. As word spread, treasure companies financed expeditions, convinced that pirate gold, or perhaps even the lost wealth of the Templars, lay buried beneath the island. Over 2 centuries, dozens of digs have collapsed into flooded tunnels, as though the island itself is determined to guard its secrets. Many dismiss Oak Island as a myth inflated by greed and folklore. Yet some researchers note uncanny parallels between the engineering of its so-called money pit and the methods attributed to medieval military orders. Flood tunnels, layered defenses, and booby traps. These were hallmarks of fortification experts. Could it be that exiled Templars crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus, hiding their treasure in the New World? If so, Oak Island might represent not merely a mystery of buried gold, but a physical continuation of the Templar map, a waypoint far beyond Europe's shores. Yet Oak Island is only one piece of a global puzzle. Across France, Scotland, and Spain, treasure hunters have uncovered symbols, carvings, and manuscripts that hint at maps long suppressed. In the village of Rennes-le-Château, a small church once pastored by Bérenger Saunier became the epicenter of 19th and 20th century speculation. Saunier reportedly discovered parchments hidden inside a hollow pillar during renovations. His sudden, unexplained wealth, bizarre architectural embellishments, and cryptic inscriptions fueled the belief that he had uncovered a fragment of the Templar's secret. Even after his death, the church quickly intervened, silencing inquiries and seizing materials he had possessed. Was this, once again, the treasure map slipping briefly into the light, only to be reabsorbed into secrecy? Elsewhere, explorers in Portugal have traced connections between Templar strongholds and Masonic symbols etched into stone. In Tomar, the Templar capital of Portugal, the Convent of Christ contains frescoes and carvings filled with geometric codes. Some suggest these designs conceal navigational instructions, a kind of star map hidden in plain sight. The Masonic lodges that later rose in Europe often carried forward Templar imagery, suggesting that fragments of the map may have survived not in monasteries, but in esoteric brotherhoods, encoded in ritual and architecture rather than parchment. But rediscoveries have not been limited to physical sites. In the 20th century, documents surfaced in obscure archives that reignited debate. One such case involved the dossier's secrets, deposited in the French National Library in the 1960s. Though widely regarded as forgeries, they linked the Templars to hidden bloodlines, to Rennes-le-Château, and to maps leading to sacred relics. For some, these dossiers were deliberate plants, designed to obscure the real trail with half-truths. For others, they were genuine fragments from an underground tradition, briefly exposed before vanishing again into obscurity. The obsession with rediscovery has created a kind of modern pilgrimage. Adventurers with metal detectors comb Templar ruins in rural France. Divers explore submerged caves in the Mediterranean, convinced that treasure ships sank while fleeing papal persecution. Cryptographers pore over medieval manuscripts, convinced that certain illuminated initials or margins conceal ciphers. The hunt itself has become a tradition, passed from generation to generation, a continuation of the Templar legacy in spirit, if not in fact. Of course, with obsession comes danger. Countless lives have been lost in the pursuit of treasure. On Oak Island alone, more than half a dozen men perished in collapses or floods. In Europe, reckless excavation beneath chapels has led to injuries, legal battles, and ruined heritage sites. The treasure map seems to exact its own toll, as though cursed to punish those who pursue it without reverence. This sense of danger only heightens its allure, reinforcing the belief that something extraordinary is truly being protected. What makes the rediscoveries so compelling is the consistency of the pattern. Again and again, fragments appear. Parchments, carvings, rumors, but never the whole. A code without its key, a map without its legend. It is as though the treasure is designed to remain hidden, allowing only glimpses that fuel curiosity but never resolve it. Skeptics interpret this as proof of hoax, a self-perpetuating myth that survives precisely because it is unsolvable. Believers, however, argue that this pattern is intentional, that the map is itself a puzzle scattered across centuries, demanding perseverance and insight to assemble. And yet, every rediscovery pushes the boundaries of possibility further. Once, the idea that the Templars reached North America was dismissed as fantasy. Today, with evidence of Norse settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows and ongoing debate about pre-Columbian transatlantic contact, the notion no longer seems entirely absurd. Once, the connection between Templars and Freemasons was seen as speculation. Today, historians acknowledge that the symbolism and rituals of Masonry draw heavily from Templar traditions. What was once fringe theory often creeps closer to legitimacy with each new find. Modern technology has also transformed the hunt. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and advanced cryptographic software have allowed researchers to probe ruins and manuscripts in ways unimaginable to earlier seekers. In recent decades, radar scans beneath Templar sites in France and Portugal have revealed chambers yet unexplored. Are these forgotten storage vaults, ritual spaces, or, as some claim, repositories waiting for the one who possesses the map to open them? The fact that many of these sites remain unexcavated due to heritage protections only intensifies speculation. Ultimately, the rediscoveries of the modern age remind us that the Templar mystery is not a relic of medieval history, but a living enigma. It breathes in the passion of treasure hunters, in the guarded secrecy of archives, and in the whispered rumors passed down in families who live near Templar ruins. Each generation inherits not only the legend, but the burden of deciding whether to chase it. The treasure map, if it ever existed in complete form, has not been found. But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps its fragments are meant to endure, to challenge us, to lure the human spirit toward mystery and wonder. Each rediscovery is a spark, brief, flickering, but enough to light the imagination. And in this sense, the treasure has already achieved immortality. For what greater wealth can there be than a mystery that refuses to die? If the Templar treasure map was too dangerous to be carried on parchment, too vulnerable to the eyes of kings and inquisitors, then where could it be hidden? The answer, many believe, lies not in documents but in stone, wood, and glass. The Templars and the secret societies that followed them may have encoded the directions to their treasure into the very fabric of the sacred architecture they helped create. Cathedrals, chapels, and fortresses became more than places of worship or defense. They became repositories of encrypted knowledge, monuments that could withstand the erosion of centuries while silently preserving a map. From the moment you step into a Gothic cathedral, the sense of something otherworldly overwhelms you. Towering spires reach toward the heavens. Stained glass filters light into sacred geometry, and every column and arch seems infused with a mathematical precision that feels closer to magic than engineering. Historians tell us this was the genius of medieval builders. Yet others see something more, a secret language of symbols, written not on paper but in stone, a message to those with the eyes to read it. The Templars were deeply involved in this wave of cathedral construction during the 12th and 13th centuries. Their connections with master masons, their financial resources, and their influence across Christendom gave them an unparalleled opportunity to embed hidden knowledge into architecture. Many of the most mysterious churches of Europe, Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, Chartres Cathedral in France, and the Convent of Christ in Tomar, Portugal, are laced with imagery that seems to whisper of secrets too great to be spoken aloud. Take Chartres Cathedral, for instance. Its labyrinth carved into the stone floor has long puzzled researchers. To the casual visitor, it is a devotional path for meditation. To others, it is a map, a coded diagram aligning with celestial patterns or distant geographies. Some argue that the labyrinth's spiraling path traces routes not only through spiritual contemplation but across real landscapes, perhaps even pointing toward sites connected with the Templar treasure. The rose windows above, with their dazzling interplay of colors and geometry, may encode the same knowledge in visual form, a cosmic compass illuminated by the sun itself. Rosslyn Chapel, often described as a Bible in stone, offers even more tantalizing clues. Built by the Sinclair family, long associated with Templar survivors, its interior explodes with carvings, angels, vines, pagan green men, and geometrical designs that seem out of place for a Christian chapel. Some see in these carvings a coded map of the New World, maize and aloe plants centuries before European contact. Others find Masonic ciphers woven into the architecture, as if the building itself was a vault of encrypted knowledge. Rosslyn has been called everything from a Grail repository to the final waypoint of the Templar treasure. To walk its aisles is to feel as though every surface is alive with messages waiting to be decoded. In Portugal, the Convent of Christ at Tomar embodies Templar symbolism at its most overt. The Great Charola, a round church modeled after the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, echoes the order's earliest headquarters. Within its murals and structural proportions, researchers claim to detect references to sacred geometry, ratios tied to the Temple of Solomon and to maps of celestial alignments. Some believe these geometries were not only symbolic but practical, pointing to distant lands across the sea where treasures were hidden. Tomar was also a center of maritime exploration in the Age of Discovery, suggesting that its architecture may conceal navigational codes that later guided voyages to the New World. But it is not only the grand cathedrals and chapels that bear these marks. Across Europe, in humble parish churches and forgotten ruins, strange carvings and stained glass panels continue to perplex. Knights engraved into tomb effigies with crossed legs, a symbol some claim denotes crusading or pilgrimage, but which others interpret as a code of hidden allegiance. Suns, moons, and stars depicted in positions that match specific astrological events, perhaps marking the timing of secret journeys. Even seemingly decorative flourishes, knots, spirals, and animals have been argued to conceal cartographic or astronomical meaning. Art, too, became a vehicle for symbolism. Renaissance painters, many connected to secret brotherhoods, filled canvases with subtle references to the Grail, the Temple, and lost treasures. Leonardo da Vinci, often cited as a carrier of esoteric knowledge, incorporated geometrical puzzles and suggestive gestures into his paintings, leading some to argue that he was a custodian of the Templar legacy. Whether or not this is true, the pattern is clear. Knowledge deemed too dangerous to write openly could be preserved in visual form, surviving censorship under the guise of beauty. The question, of course, is whether these symbols truly constitute a map, or whether they are simply the projections of seekers desperate for meaning. Skeptics argue that Gothic architecture, with its obsession with geometry and light, was a natural outcome of medieval spirituality, not evidence of secret maps. They caution that humans are wired to find patterns, to impose meaning where none exists. And yet, the sheer consistency of the symbols across regions, orders, and centuries suggests something deliberate. Consider this. The same symbols, crosses within circles, interlocking triangles, labyrinths, stars of unusual orientation, appear in France, Spain, Scotland, and Portugal. These are not random decorations, but recurring motifs tied to places where Templars were active. If they do not encode the treasure map directly, They may at least mark nodes on a broader network of hidden knowledge, waypoints in a journey that only the initiated could complete. Modern researchers have attempted to decode these architectural symbols using computer modeling, satellite imagery, and astronomical software. Some claim alignments between cathedrals mirror the constellations, suggesting a celestial map laid upon the earth. Others argue that certain chapels, when connected on a map, trace geometric figures, pentagons, hexagrams, that may point toward a hidden location. Whether these findings represent deliberate design or coincidence remains debated. But the possibility that an ancient map lies inscribed not in ink, but in the very bones of Europe's sacred architecture is difficult to dismiss outright. The symbolism embedded in art and architecture ensures that the Templar treasure map, if real, cannot be easily destroyed. Parchments can burn, oral traditions can fade, but stone endures. Stained glass may shatter, but its patterns can be recreated. Carvings weather, yet their outlines linger. In this sense, the map is immortal, hiding in plain sight, waiting for those with the courage and insight to read it. Perhaps this is the true genius of the Templars, that they did not leave a single map, a fragile document doomed to vanish, but scattered fragments across 1,000 works of art and architecture. To reconstruct the map is to piece together these symbols across time and space, to trace the hidden language that winds its way through Europe's cathedrals and chapels like veins of light through stained glass. In this way, every rediscovery, every strange carving noticed, every alignment mapped, is a fragment of the treasure map returning to the world. Whether or not it leads to gold is almost secondary. The real treasure may be the revelation itself, the realization that history is not what we were told, that knowledge has been encoded around us all along, invisible until we learn to see. Every great mystery endures not only because of what is revealed, but also because of what is deliberately hidden. The story of the Templar treasure map is not merely a tale of discovery. It is also a chronicle of systematic suppression. For centuries, kings, popes, and secretive institutions have ensured that fragments of the truth remain buried, that archives remain sealed, and that anyone who comes too close to uncovering the full picture is silenced, discredited, or destroyed. To understand the suppression, we must return to October 1307, when King Philip IV of France, drowning in debt to the Templars, ordered their mass arrest. At dawn on Friday the 13th, knights across France were seized, accused of heresy, and subjected to brutal interrogation. The charges, spitting on the cross, worshipping idols, practicing forbidden rites, were sensational, but beneath the propaganda was a deeper motive: to dismantle an order that had grown too wealthy, too independent, and perhaps too knowledgeable. The Vatican, under Pope Clement V, at first hesitated, but pressure from Philip forced the papacy to act. Soon, inquisitors across Europe confiscated Templar properties, searched vaults, and seized documents. What they found has never been fully revealed. Contemporary records hint at crates of documents, chests of gold, and relics spirited away. Yet by the time inventories reached the public record, much had vanished. Where did it go? Here lies the first act of suppression: selective silence. Papal records were carefully curated, revealing only what supported the charges of heresy, while omitting any mention of treasures or maps. In the Vatican archives, documents relating to the Templars were sealed under secretum classification, hidden for centuries. Only in 2001 did the Chinon parchment, absolving the Templars of heresy, come to light after 700 years in secrecy. If a document this crucial could remain buried for so long, what else lies in the vaults? Maps, correspondences, or coded charts pointing to the treasure's resting place? But suppression was not confined to the medieval period. Through the Renaissance and beyond, whispers of Templar secrets periodically surfaced, only to be stamped out. In France, families connected to the order claimed possession of hidden documents, yet their lineages curiously vanished or were absorbed into Masonic secrecy. In Spain and Portugal, where Templars were officially dissolved, but their members rebranded as the Knights of Christ, questions about continuity were discouraged. Ships bearing the Templar cross began exploring new oceans, but their records often disappeared into royal archives, guarded as state secrets. By the 18th century, Freemasonry had emerged, carrying forward symbols strongly reminiscent of Templar tradition. Was this transmission accidental, or did it reflect suppressed knowledge resurfacing in another form? Authorities certainly treated it as dangerous. Governments infiltrated lodges, censored writings, and banned societies that seemed to guard hidden truths. In Catholic nations, particularly, the suspicion was clear. Behind the Masonic veils lingered the Templar legacy, and with it, the possibility of maps and treasures that could destabilize the Church's narrative. The Vatican has remained at the center of suspicion. Its secret archives, now called the Apostolic Archive, stretch for miles beneath Rome. Scholars who have entered describe corridors of documents stacked floor to ceiling, entire collections dedicated to the Templar trials. Yet access is highly restricted, with only fragments declassified at any given time. If the Templar map ever existed in written form, the Vatican is the most likely custodian. And if it does lie there, it remains deliberately withheld, considered too disruptive to release. Suppression has not only been institutional, but also personal. Across history, individuals who claim to have uncovered Templar secrets often met strange fates. The French priest Béranger Saunière of Rennes-le-Château, who reportedly found parchments tied to Templar and Grail lore, died suddenly after years of unexplained wealth and Encoded renovations to his church. His possessions were seized, his discoveries silenced. In the 20th century, researchers who pushed too far into the Rennes mystery, such as Noël Corbu and later Pierre Plantard, were discredited, their reputations ruined, their evidence dismissed as forgeries or fantasies. Whether these were deliberate cover-ups or the collapse of hoaxes is still debated, but the pattern is striking. The Oak Island mystery offers another example. Over 2 centuries, dozens of companies and individuals have poured fortunes into excavations. Each time discoveries are rumored. Inscriptions on stone, fragments of parchment, strange metal objects. Official reports grow vague. Access is restricted, and artifacts quietly vanish into private collections. Television programs and books speculate endlessly, but the concrete evidence always seems to dissolve. Skeptics chalk this up to exaggeration. Believers suspect suppression at work, a deliberate effort to keep the deeper truth hidden. But why such secrecy? Why guard so fiercely against the revelation of a map? The answer may lie in power. If the Templars carried from Jerusalem knowledge that could challenge the Church's authority, relics of Christ, documents proving an alternate history, or evidence of a hidden bloodline, then the stakes would be nothing less than control over the spiritual narrative of the West. To release such knowledge could fracture centuries of theology, undermine monarchies, and rewrite history. Even if the treasure were purely material, gold, jewels, sacred relics, its sudden discovery could destabilize economies and empower rival factions. For those who sit in seats of authority, the safest course has always been suppression. And so, the Templar map lives in the shadows, rumored, glimpsed, whispered, but never officially confirmed. Institutions that might shed light, the Vatican, National Archives, private collectors, remain silent. Families connected to Templar descendants guard their traditions carefully. Secret societies carry forward the imagery, but cloak it in ritual. The treasure map has not disappeared. It has been buried beneath layers of intentional secrecy. To some, this suppression itself is proof of the treasure's reality. If nothing existed, why expend centuries of effort hiding it? Why silence, censor, and discredit? The very act of secrecy becomes testimony. The treasure map may not be a folded parchment locked in a chest, but a network of coded knowledge, dispersed and concealed, awaiting the day when the guardians either falter or decide the world is ready. For now, the suppression continues. The Vatican holds its silence. Archives remain closed. Treasure hunters press forward, but each discovery meets resistance. And so the mystery lingers, not dead, not revealed, but suspended in the twilight between secrecy and revelation. The Templars may have vanished from history, but their greatest secret, the map to their treasure, endures in the shadows, guarded by the silence of those who fear its power. Every great story builds toward a moment when the fog begins to clear, when fragments scattered across centuries finally align into a single picture. For the Templar treasure, that picture has always been blurred. Glimpses of gold and legend, whispers of maps and hidden archives, hints of relics in the art and architecture of Europe. But if we gather all the threads, the Grail legends, the New World voyages, the suppressed documents, the coded cathedrals, what emerges is not a random scattering of myth, but a coherent path, leading us closer to what may be the treasure's true resting place. Let's begin with what we know. The Templars were not crushed overnight. Though many knights were arrested in France in 1307, others escaped. Portugal absorbed them into the Order of Christ. Scotland sheltered fugitives in its rugged highlands, where papal writ held little sway. Spain, too, allowed remnants of the order to survive under new banners. If the treasure was hidden, it must have been carried to one of these safe havens. Now recall the Grail traditions. The Stone of Light, described by Wolfram von Eschenbach, the radiant vessel sustaining knights in secret, the idea that the Grail was never a cup but a body of knowledge or even a navigational secret. These tales arose not in Jerusalem, but in Europe, and often in regions where the Templars were strong. That suggests the Grail was not merely an allegory, but a veil, a poetic retelling of the Order's true secret, that they had preserved something extraordinary and carried it west. The Oak Island mystery brings this further. The engineering beneath the money pit is too elaborate for simple pirates. Flood tunnels, booby traps, layered platforms. These are the designs of master builders, precisely the expertise of the Templars. If fugitives from France sailed with their treasure, Nova Scotia's hidden chambers may represent the culmination of their journey. The treasure transferred from the old world to the new, beyond the reach of kings or popes. But Oak Island is not the only candidate. Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland has long been suspected of guarding the treasure, or at least its map. Its carvings of maize and aloe suggest contact with the Americas before Columbus. Its Masonic geometry mirrors star maps and sacred ratios. The Sinclair family, patrons of Rosslyn, were rumored to have hosted Templar fugitives. Could it be that Rosslyn preserves not the treasure itself, but the directions to its transatlantic resting place? A stone codex, etched into walls and windows, awaiting those with the wisdom to decode it. Meanwhile, Portugal's Order of Christ sponsored the great age of exploration. Prince Henry the Navigator, himself a Grand Master of the Order, financed voyages that opened new horizons. Some scholars argue these voyages were not exploratory at all, but deliberate, guided by secret charts inherited from the Templars. In this view, the Americas were not a discovery, but a destination already marked on a map encoded centuries earlier. The treasure may not have been gold alone, but knowledge, maps, charts, and navigational techniques centuries ahead of their time. The suppression we explored earlier strengthens this theory. The Vatican's silence, the sudden disappearances of evidence at Rennes-le-Château, the sealing of documents and archives, all suggest that something monumental lies hidden, something considered too destabilizing to reveal. If the treasure were merely wealth, why guard its secret so jealously? But if it were a revelation, manuscripts, relics, or proof of a lineage, then suppression becomes not greed, but survival, the defense of an entire worldview. So where, then, does all of this lead? The answer may be unsettling. There may not be a single resting place. The Templar treasure, like the Grail, may exist in multiple forms and locations, deliberately scattered to prevent capture. One fragment in Rosslyn, encoded in carvings. Another in Tomar, locked in geometry. Another perhaps buried in Oak Island's flooded shafts. Each piece is both a safeguard and a clue, requiring seekers to assemble the puzzle across continents and centuries. The map itself may not be a single document, but a network, a web of symbols, churches, stories, and alignments that, when seen together, point toward the final secret. And what is that final secret? Some argue it is Christ's bloodline, preserved in hidden genealogies. Others insist it is a relic, the Ark of the Covenant, the Grail, or sacred manuscripts. Still others suggest it is knowledge itself, the science of navigation, sacred geometry, or an understanding of the cosmos passed down from ancient civilizations. Whatever the truth, the Templars may have recognized that the treasure's greatest value lay not in possession, but in concealment, ensuring that only those worthy, persistent, and insightful could ever approach it. The climactic revelation, then, is not a chest of gold in a single vault. It is the realization that the treasure has been hiding in plain sight all along. The map is written across Europe's cathedrals, its chapels, its art. It is etched into Roslyn's walls, buried in Oak Island's labyrinths, whispered in Grail romances, and sealed in Vatican vaults. To pursue the treasure is to weave these threads together, to see the world itself as the map. Perhaps this is the final resting place, not a geographic location, but a state of awareness. The treasure was never meant for kings or conquerors. It was meant for seekers, those willing to follow symbols, decode mysteries, and walk the labyrinth of history. In this sense, the treasure lives not in a cave or a vault, but in the act of questing itself. The Templars, masters of secrecy, ensured that their greatest possession could never truly be stolen, because its final resting place is in the minds of those who search, in the revelation that history itself is a coded text, waiting to be read. And so we arrive at the climax of the mystery. Whether buried in Nova Scotia's soil, hidden beneath Roslyn stones, or scattered in fragments across Europe and the Americas, the Templar treasure remains out of reach. But its map, the hidden cartography of symbols, stories, and architecture, surrounds us, enduring through suppression, defying time. The final resting place may never be revealed with certainty, and perhaps that is by design. For in the end, the treasure is not the destination. It is the quest itself. As our journey draws to a close, we must pause to reflect on what we have uncovered. For hours we have traveled across centuries and continents, following faint trails left in stone, parchment, and legend. We began with a question. Is there a hidden map that shows the final resting place of the Templar treasure? What we have found is not a single, simple answer, but a tapestry, threads of faith, power, secrecy, and myth woven into the very fabric of Western history. The story of the Knights Templar has always been more than history. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's hunger for transcendence, for the possibility that behind the chaos of wars and kingdoms lies a hidden design. That hunger has animated scholars, treasure hunters, mystics, and conspiracy theorists alike. Each, in their own way, has sought not merely gold, but meaning. The sense that history contains secrets deliberately concealed, waiting for those bold enough to look deeper. What, then, is the true lesson of the Templar treasure? On the surface, it appears to be about wealth, immense hoards of gold, relics of unimaginable power, or artifacts that could alter the course of nations. Yet as we peel back the layers, it becomes clear that the treasure may not be material at all. The Grail legends suggest enlightenment, a sacred stone of knowledge rather than a cup of jewels. Roslyn Chapel encodes geometry and botany that hint at voyages to worlds unknown. Oak Island's labyrinth of shafts points not merely to valuables, but to extraordinary planning, the engineering of secrecy itself. The treasure, in other words, may not be what was hidden, but how it was hidden. The brilliance of the Templars was not only their wealth, but their ability to encode mysteries into the world around them. In architecture, symbols, maps, and myths, they understood that power lies not in possession, but in concealment. For if a treasure is too dangerous to reveal, then its protection depends on making it invisible, dispersed, and eternal. This leads us back to the idea of the hidden map. What if the map is not a parchment locked in a chest, but the world itself? A network of markers disguised as churches, chapels, and stories. A constellation of symbols stretching from Jerusalem to France, from Scotland to Nova Scotia. The Templars may have ensured that no single individual could ever hold the key, but that generations of seekers could continue the search. In doing so, they transformed the treasure into something more enduring than gold, a living mystery. And this mystery has consequences. Think of how many movements have been shaped by the Templar legend. Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, secret societies claiming descent from the order. Think of how explorers, driven by whispers of hidden wealth, charted new worlds and opened new frontiers. Think of how millions of ordinary people, restless with the official version of history, find comfort in the belief that there are secrets still untold, treasures still buried, truths still waiting. In a sense, the Templar treasure has already achieved immortality, not through discovery, but through inspiration. But there is another lesson, subtler and perhaps more profound. The Templars remind us that history itself is contested ground. For every chronicle written, there is another erased. For every artifact displayed, there is another concealed. Power has always meant controlling the narrative of the past. When the Templars were suppressed, their history was rewritten by their enemies. Yet fragments survived, encoded in stone, whispered in legend, hinted at in forbidden texts. To search for the Templar treasure is also to search for the history that was suppressed, the story that authority tried to erase. And perhaps that is why the tale continues to resonate today. We live in an age of uncertainty, where official narratives are questioned, where trust in institutions wanes. The Templar mystery speaks to that unease. It whispers that the truth is never what it seems, that beneath the surface lies another layer, and beneath that another still. It tells us that sometimes the greatest treasure is not certainty, but the courage to question. Now, let us return to the final question. Where's the treasure? The most honest answer is that it may never be found, at least not in the form people expect. Gold can be melted, relics can be lost, manuscripts can crumble. But myths endure. They pass through centuries like a current beneath the surface of history, carrying with them fragments of possibility. Perhaps the treasure has already been discovered and quietly absorbed into secret archives. Perhaps it lies forgotten in a vault beneath Roslyn, or in the depths of Oak Island, or scattered across Europe in pieces too subtle to recognize. Or perhaps the treasure is this very mystery, the unbroken chain of seekers who keep the flame alive by asking the question anew. So as we close, consider this. Every map requires an interpreter. Every treasure requires a seeker. The Templars may have left behind a hidden map, but they ensured that only those who dared to look beyond appearances could ever hope to read it. And in that sense, the final resting place of the Templar treasure is not merely geographical. It is within the imagination of those who keep searching, who refuse to accept that history has told us everything, who are willing to step into the unknown. The mystery, then, is the inheritance. The quest itself is the gift. And perhaps that was the Templars' greatest treasure of all. As we end this journey, one question remains, lingering like an echo through the centuries. If the map is before us, hidden in plain sight, will we ever truly dare to read it?